How significant are these NDAs?
Well, it does look like the NDAs ultimately would allow that group of bondholders access to see things like Kaisa's financing and some of the kind of broader scale of potentially its liquidity problems, ultimately to understand whether a new money deal that would inject cash into the company would in fact actually be effective. It is worth bearing in mind that this group of bondholders is sort of mainly focused in the tranche, the dollar note that actually came due on Tuesday. And so, of course, any kind of financing plan or any kind of financing deal would have to have broader approval across all of Kaisa's $11.6 billion bonds if it involved any kind of sort of action on those bonds itself.
Rebecca, we heard from S&P Global Ratings saying the default of Evergrandes seems like an inevitability at this point. What do we know and expect for the road ahead?
Well, as we've said before, this is a different phase for Evergrandes' sort of debt crisis now. I think, in fact, S&P have sort of been talking about a potential inevitable default scenario for quite some time now. But I think the key thing really is to look out for developments with the restructuring itself. We know that Evergrande is sort of potentially seeking to take a holistic approach to the restructuring. It's going to include all of the offshore bonds, so that includes everything from its private placement to the notes that are issued both by Scenery Journey and by Evergrande Group itself. One interesting question here is, of course, this is going to be an incredibly complex restructuring across several different jurisdictions. And in addition, there is this whole question of how you sort of rate these bonds in terms of their value, in terms of their seniority. So while lots of these notes have the same kind of seniority, senior unsecured bonds, they are issued by different units of Evergrande that are proximate to different parts of this business. And that makes the whole process much more complicated when it comes to Evergrande and its advisors sort of assigning a potential value when it's looking at the potential haircuts in a debt restructuring scenario.
And at the same time, though, we are seeing Asian dollar bonds rallying the most we've seen this month. Is this on account of some of the support we've seen pledged from the government as well as that RRR cut? What is, I guess, the longer-term outlook? Because we've spoken to investors who are actually quite constructive, saying, look, after all this kind of shakeout, you might actually be ending up with some much stronger players from a fiscal side.
Absolutely. I think, yes, so far, we've seen actually contagion really well contained, despite this drama at, two of China's largest developer borrowers there, Kaisa and Evergrande, China high yield bonds and Asian dollar bonds, both rallying essentially off the back of those signs of potential easing that you point to, including things like the RRR cut. I do think longer term, however, there is still a question mark over the sort of financial health. We are going to see consolidation, stronger firms are going to thrive, but what happens to the many weaker developers is still very much a question up for grabs, particularly with yields above 20% in the offshore bond market.